اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء. اللهم صل وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء. يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك واستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائحي ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته وكم من فادح من البلاء أقلته وكم من عثار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرط بي سوء حالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد آمالي وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بخيانتها. ومطالي يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثر شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في الأحوال كلها رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ضري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي، فغرني بما هو وأسعده على ذلك القضاء، فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعض حدودك وخالفت بعض أوامرك، فلك الحجة علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاؤك، وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك، وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا معترفا، لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة من رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شد ضري وفكني من شد وثاقي، يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي، يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي، أبني لابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي، أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد من طوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج به لساني من ذكرك واعتقده ضميري من حبك، وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك، هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيته أو تبعد من أدنيته أو تشرد من آويته أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته، وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي فتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدة وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقة وبشكرك مادحة وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققة وعلى ضمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طائعة وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة، ما هكذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم يا ربي، وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكثه يسير بقاؤه قصير مدته، فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك، وهذا ما لا تقوم وسخطك وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي، فكيف بي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين، يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو لما منها أضج وأبكي، لأديم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته، فلأن سيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي، صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك، وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك، أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك، فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لأن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج العاملين ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين، أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وضاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته وهو يضج إليك الضجيج مؤمنا لرحمتك، ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك، ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي. وكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك؟ أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه؟ أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه؟ أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه؟ أم كيف تزجره زبائنتها وهو يناديك يا ربه؟ أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها؟ هيهات، ما هكذا الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك، ولا مشبه لما عاملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك. فباليقين أبقى لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما، وما كانت لأحد مقرا ولا مقاما. لكنك تقدست أسماءك أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين. وأنت جل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما، أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي، فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت عليه من أجريتها أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته، وكل ذنب أذنبته، وكل قبيح أسررته، وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته، أخفيته أو أظهرته، وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيته وبفضلك سترته، وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلته أو إحسان تفضله أو بر تنشره أو رزق تبسطه أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب. أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل لي أوقاتي في الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة وبخدمتك موصولة وأعمالي عندك مقبولة، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب. قو على خدمتك جوارحي واجدد على العزيمة جوانحي، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك، حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في المبادرين وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين وأخافك مخافة الموقنين واجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأبد ومن كادني فكد، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وأقربهم منزلة منك وخصهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك. وجد لي بجودك واعطف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك، واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما، ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وأقلني عثرتي واغفر لي زلتي، فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وضمنت لهم الإجابة. فإليك يا ربي نصبت وجهي وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي يا سريع الرضا يا سريع الرضا يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاحه البكاء يا سابغ النعم يا دافع النقم يا نور المستوحشين في الظلم يا عالما لا يعلم صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بما أنت أهله وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Thank you to Brother Ahmed. Inshallah, we'll start the program at 8:30 p.m. So until then, we will take a break and we will come back at 8:30 p.m. to start the program.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. وقالوا ما لهذا الرسول يأكل الطعام بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألف لام را أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان
Assalamu alaikum everyone. For those who have joined us, we will be starting at 8:30 as our schedule. Dua Kumayl ended a bit earlier today, so inshallah we'll wait 4 minutes and then we'll start our program. Inshallah.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان. الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان. والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجان من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. رب المشرقين ورب المغربين فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. وله الجوار المنشآت في البحر كالأعلام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. يسأله من في السماوات والأرض كل يوم هو في شأن فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. سنفرغ لكم أيها الثقلان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. يا معشر الجن والإنس إن استطعتم أن تنفذوا من أقطار السماوات والأرض فانفذوا لا تنفذون إلا بسلطان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. يرسل عليكما شواظ من نار ونحاس فلا تنتصران فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. فإذا انشقت السماء فكانت وردة كالدهان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. فيومئذ لا يسأل عن ذنبه إنس ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. يعرف المجرمون بسيماهم فيؤخذ بالنواصي والأقدام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. هذه جهنم التي يكذب بها المجرمون يطوفون بينها وبين حميم آن فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. ولمن خاف مقام ربه جنتان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. ذواتا أفنان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. فيهما عينان تجريان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. فيهما من كل فاكهة زوجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان متكئين على فرش بطائنها من استبرق وجنى الجنتين دان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهن قاصرات الطرف لم يطمثهن إنس قبلهم ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان كأنهن الياقوت والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان ومن دونهما جنتان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان مدهامتان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما عينان نضاختان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهما فاكهة ونخل ورمان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيهن خيرات حسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان حور مقصورات في الخيام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان لم يطمثهن إنس قبلهم ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان متكئين على رفرف خضر وعبقري حسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان تبارك اسم ربك ذي الجلال والإكرام صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Inshallah, tonight we are celebrating the program for the Wiladat of our fourth Imam, Imam Zayn Abideen. So inshallah, we'll be moving on with the program. For those of you who have just joined us, we'll be having poetry, and please recite a salawat as we begin the poetry. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala.
صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. न पूछिए कि क्या हुसैन है, न पूछिए कि क्या हुसैन है, क्या हुसैन है, न पूछिए कि क्या हुसैन है। खुदा के दी का ना खुदा, खुदा के दी का ना खुदा, हर इब्तिदा की इब्तिदा, करम की इंतहा हुसैन है, क्या हुसैन है। न पूछिए कि क्या हुसैन है, क्या हुसैन है, न पूछिए कि क्या हुसैन है। करे जो कोई हमसरी, किसी की क्या मजाल है। जहां में हर लिहाज से हुसैन बेमिसाल है। ये हो चुका है फैसला, ये हो चुका है फैसला, न कोई दूसरा खुदा। ये हो चुका है फैसला, یہ ہو چکا ہے فیصلہ نہ کوئی دوسرا خدا نہ کوئی دوسرا حسین ہے کیا حسین ہے نہ پوچھئے کہ کیا حسین ہے کیا حسین ہے نہ پوچھئے کہ کیا حسین ہے جس کی فکر کربلا حسین وہ دماغ ہے جس کی فکر کربلا حسین وہ دماغ ہے یہ پنجتن کی انجمن کا پانچواں چراغ ہے حسن کا پہلا ہم سفر حسن کا پہلا ہم سفر علی کا دوسرا پسر امام تیسرا حسین ہے کیا حسین ہے نہ پوچھئے کہ کیا حسین ہے کیا حسین ہے نہ پوچھئے کہ کیا حسین ہے کرو گے گر مخالفت غم حسین کی یہاں کرو گے گر مخالفت غم حسین کی یہاں وہ حشر ہوگا حشر میں کہ الحفیظ علماء کرو گے گر مخالفت غم حسین کی یہاں وہ حشر ہوگا حشر میں کہ الحفیظ علماء جہاں بھی چھپنے جاؤ گے جہاں بھی چھپنے جاؤ گے کہیں بھی بچ نہ پاؤ گے جہاں بھی چھپنے جاؤ گے کہیں بھی بچ نہ پاؤ گے کہ ہر جگہ میرا حسین ہے کیا حسین ہے نہ پوچھئے کہ کیا حسین ہے نہ پوچھئے کہ کیا حسین ہے کیا حسین ہے نہ پوچھئے کہ کیا حسین ہے قضا کے بعد پھر مجھے نئی حیات مل گئی فشار سے عذاب سے مجھے نجات مل گئی قضا کے بعد پھر مجھے نئی حیات مل گئی فشار سے عذاب سے مجھے نجات مل گئی سوال جب کیا گیا ہے کون تیرا رہنما سوال جب کیا گیا ہے کون تیرا رہنما تو میں نے کہہ دیا حسین ہے کیا حسین ہے نہ پوچھئے کہ کیا حسین ہے کیا حسین ہے نہ پوچھئے کہ کیا حسین ہے نہ پوچھئے کہ کیا حسین ہے صلوات
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thank you so much, Brother Ali. Inshallah, we'll move on with our program. And with that, I would like to invite Sheikh Jafar for the speech. Please recite a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. الحمد لله بارئ الخلائق أجمعين ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه أجمعين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أرواحنا له فداء. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألم تر إلى الملأ من بني إسرائيل من بعد موسى إذ قالوا لنبي لهم ابعث لنا ملكا نقاتل في سبيل الله قال هل عسيتم إن كتب عليكم القتال ألا تقاتلوا قالوا ما لنا وما لنا ألا نقاتل في سبيل الله وقد أخرجنا من ديارنا وأبنائنا فلما كتب عليهم القتال تولوا إلا قليلا منهم والله عليم بالظالمين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, mu'mineen wa mu'minat. First and foremost, I congratulate all of you on the auspicious occasion which we are celebrating tonight, and that is the birth of Imam Zayn al-Abideen alayhi afdalus salatu wassalam. As we began a couple of nights ago, the topic of the pillars of an Islamic society, or rather a righteous society, that society which submits to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that society that recognizes the authority of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the very top of that level of the society to the very bottom of the society. So when that society has these three pillars, then you will find that the society would be a righteous society, a religious society, an Islamic society, meaning a society that submits to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those three pillars were qa'idatul iman, qa'idatul istiqama, and qa'idatul hurriya. So the pillar of faith, which we mentioned on the eve of the birthday of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. The second is the pillar of being steadfast on a path of justice, which we mentioned on the Wiladat of Abu al-Fadl Abbas alayhi salam. And tonight we'll wrap up this discussion with speaking about that third pillar, which is the pillar of freedom, al-hurriya. And we are mentioning this tonight as we are celebrating the birthday of Imam Zayn al-Abideen alayhi salatu wasalam, which would probably be appropriate as well, because Imam Zayn al-Abideen, when you look at his life, he was perhaps the first Imam, in fact, was the first Imam who was actually incarcerated. He was imprisoned after the Battle of Karbala, and thereby being imprisoned, losing what one would consider freedom. So when we look at the meaning of freedom, because it's very important, as I mentioned, to understand the concept of freedom. What is freedom? Of course, there are a lot of places, a lot of societies, a lot of countries. They say, oh, well, this is there's a freedom that people enjoy. So when we look at the definition of freedom, we find that if we look at all of them, there's a lot of definitions of freedom we can take into consideration, but some freedoms are considered personal freedom. The person has personal freedom of choosing what he or she wears, or and various things. And then we have a collective freedom where people live supposedly in freedom. In fact, one interesting definition of freedom, or what was equated to freedom as well, is citizenship. So it is said that a person who has citizenship is a person that enjoys freedom. And this is perhaps because if we look at the legal definition as well of freedom, you go to a law dictionary, for example, the Black's Dictionary of Law. There's a very famous dictionary of law that many lawyers use, that this idea of a person who has rights is considered a person to be free, because only people who are free have rights, at least according to the Black's law of the Black's dictionary of law. So freedom comes in that sense. Also, when we think about freedom, and sometimes in order to understand the meaning of a word, you take the opposite of that word. So freedom would be the opposite of incarceration. So if a person is arrested, a person is in jail, then yes, their freedom has been taken from them. They are no longer able to move freely within the land or move or go wherever they want. They are imprisoned. As we tend to know about the life of many of our latter imams, that they were incarcerated, they were imprisoned by the Abbasid government, therefore limiting and restricting their movement, restricting who came and spoke with them, who they interacted with. So incarceration is the opposite of freedom. Likewise, we can see that one of the opposites of freedom as well is dependence. So if you're dependent on someone, you're not free in that area that you are dependent upon another person. A few other words also comes into the dictionaries with regards to the opposite, the anonym of freedom, to be subjugated, subjection. These are also ideas about a person who lacks freedom if they are subjugated to something. And more simpler word to think about it, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he uses this here in the verse that we have been reciting throughout these 3 nights, in verse 246 of Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2 of the Quran, 246, where the people, or here in this verse, the Bani Israel, they were oppressed. So oppression as well is an anonym of freedom. So any people or anyone who is oppressed by a tyrant or oppressed by others, those individuals, they lack freedom. So that pillar of Islamic society, as we mentioned, is freedom. But one thing that we have to understand as well about freedom, and this comes with any definition of freedom, or even any country that advocates or says that there's freedom, even this Islamic notion of freedom that we want to discuss as well, that freedom comes within in the context of laws. There's nothing as absolute freedom. You know, the only one who has that type of freedom to do may yasha, or whatever he wants and whatever he wills, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But everyone else's freedom, our freedom, no matter where we live at, it is bound by a law. And this is why we also, when we look at any legal dictionary as well, freedom is often qualified by something. So there's a definition of freedom. It may equate it to citizenship or rights. So anyone who has rights, so that person is free. Then you have freedom, which is qualified by certain adjectives or certain things. So freedom of speech, for example. So a person is free to speak. Freedom of assembly. People are free as a collective to gather together, to talk, to discuss. And so this is why freedom is qualified by certain things, because freedom in any place is bound by the law. So therefore, in order to understand freedom and the amount of freedom or the type of freedom that a person is allotted, then you would have to see that what are those laws that are there? And are those laws, are they laws that bring about those other and support the other 2 aspects of a righteous society? Do those laws support Iman and faith, the cultivation of this understanding? It's not simply say that one believes, but this understanding that everything belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is Malikul Mulk. Tabarakalladhi biyadihi al-mulk. So, and because he owns everything, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala possesses everything and he is the ultimate authority, then the barakah that exists in a society is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, the laws as well, and that freedom that is allotted in that place, and that society, which is a righteous society, which is an Islamic society, which is a society that understands the authority of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then those laws too must be a source of barakah, be a source of blessing for everyone that's in that society. And secondly, that those laws, which are, again, is going to set the parameters for that freedom, those laws also must be, have istiqamah built in it, must have a sense of justice, must have a pathway towards justice, because that hurriya is going to, again, it's going to be completely in sync with the first two pillars of the Islamic society, or a society that is righteous, a society that is in submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, if we go back to that verse, verse 246 of Surah Al-Baqarah, one of the things that we notice is that when Bani Israel, they are approaching their prophet, قَالُوا لِنَبِيٍّ لَهُمْ إِبْعَثْ لَنَا مَلِكًا نُقَاتِلْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. So they're requesting a king, a leader, and actually a warrior king that will lead them to throw off the yoke of oppression from their necks. In other words, they are looking to be liberated. They're looking to have this freedom, because obviously in the situation that they were in the city, the town that they were living in, they were oppressed. And by being oppressed, they were not free. So they are looking to be liberated. And of course, that liberation, as we mentioned, it needs commitment, needs that istiqamah in order to, to set up justice, to remove oppression and injustice from a society, or to remove that oppression and injustice from themselves, to throw off that yoke of oppression. So they were seeking liberation. They were seeking this freedom. But as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states that, that they were seeking that freedom, one, because they felt that their freedom had been taken. And this is explained when they state that, well, why wouldn't we fight for our liberation? Why wouldn't we, make this, take on this great task? وَقَدْ أُخْرِجْنَا مِنْ دِيَارِنَا وَأَبْنَائِنَا. That when we have been expelled from our homes, and our children, our families have been also expelled from our homes, so we must take up this cause to be liberated. And they asked their prophet for that king, that warrior king that will liberate them. However, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he states in the latter part of this verse, which is very interesting, we have to pay attention to this. So it says that when they were told that, okay, Talut, he will be your king, he will, again, remove you from oppression and injustice, he will liberate you, cause you to gain your freedom, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تَوَلَّوْا إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِّنْهُمْ. That only a few of them remain steadfast. Only a few of them remain firm to their commitment. And this is much like the people of Kufa. Again, Imam Hussein alayhi salatu, Abu Fadl Abbas, Zayn al-Kubra, and they all went towards Karbala. There was a commitment from the people of Kufa to stand firm to gain their freedom, because they felt that they were under the oppression of Yazid. They understood that Yazid would not allot these pillars of Islam, or of a righteous society, to thrive. He would do away with them. So they wrote to Imam Hussein to come, and we will stand with you to establish justice. But only a few of them remain committed to what they wrote. The companions like Habib ibn Madahir, Muslim ibn Usaja, others were co-opted. And of course, Hur himself, he turned back from that, from being co-opted with the tyranny that was going on at the time. But those who did not stand, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Wallahu alimun bil-zalimin, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's aware of those who are unjust. And as many of the commentators of the Quran, when they speak about this latter part, they said that this is speaking not about the tyrant himself, who Bani Israel, they were asking their prophet for someone to lead them so that they can stand, so that they can be liberated from that tyrant. But Allah, Wallahu alimun bil-zalimin, it is indicating on those folks who did not follow through in their commitment and their request from the prophet to send them a liberator, but rather they fell to the wayside, or worse, they were co-opted by the tyrant himself. Just like the people of Kufa, or many of the people of Kufa, that when Ibn Ziyad, he came into Kufa, we mentioned this before, that he gave them money to surrender their weapons, and then so they wouldn't fight for Imam Hussein. Then they gave them money and their weapons back so that they will stand with the army of Yazid and Ibn Ziyad against Imam Hussein. So, Wallahu alimun bil-zalimin. So if a person was not a part of the solution, they became a part of the problem. So in order to, again, establish a more righteous society, then a person cannot become a part of the problem, to be co-opted and to think that, oh, well, there's nothing wrong. That, oh, personally, I'm okay. My personal freedom is there, and I'm not going to look at what's happening to others, the oppression or the injustice that is happening within society or within the world. Because this is not the sirat of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus wasalam, nor the sirat of these great personalities which we are celebrating in this first week of Sha'ban. Imam Zayn al-Abideen alayhi afdalus wasalam, as I mentioned, is one of the great examples for us, a very great inspiration to speak about this topic. As if we look in the du'as of Imam Zayn al-Abideen, or even in the Risalat al-Hukuk, the treaties of rights of Imam Zayn al-Abideen, this idea and this concept comes up about freedom. And we think that why wouldn't it come up for the Imam who was the first Imam who was incarcerated and his freedom was taken from him, that's put in chains, ushered within the Muslim world to Kufa and then to Sham, to Damascus, and put in the dungeon. So why would not this be an important topic to the Imam? It was. And in the method that the Imam he taught, he brought about this awareness of freedom, this awareness of liberation, this awareness of standing up for what is right, what is just, and standing against injustice. In fact, when we read the du'as of Imam Zayn al-Abideen and the treaties of rights, which I will allude to in a second, it helps us to understand our duty for our time, how to be those who champion social justice, how to be those individuals who, again, uplift these three pillars of a righteous society, and to do our part in making people more aware and more conscious that in this world, the ultimate authority is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ultimate authority. Anyone who assumes that they have power and they think that the buck stops here or the buck ends there and that really that's where power lies, then they are under an illusion. So how do we, again, make or at least bring about awareness to that no, everything stops with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the one who has true authority. And how do we do our part in having istiqamah, being on a path towards justice and social justice? And how do we, again, ensure true freedom? That freedom, as I said, that the parameters of freedom is going to be based on the laws. Where does that lie? And how do we recognize when, there is a false idea or concept of freedom? And how do we, again, stand before those individuals who have what I call the Pharaoh complex? And what is this Pharaoh complex? If we read verses 70 and 71 of Surah Taha, so chapter 20 of the Quran, verse 20 and 21, we understand what this Pharaoh complex is, and where oppression and injustice takes root within a society. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he states in verse 70 71 of Surah Taha, the story of Nabi Musa alayhi salam, and when Nabi Musa, he goes to the court of the Pharaoh. This is when the challenge had begun, that the Pharaoh said that he would bring his men, his sorcerers, and then they will challenge the Prophet Musa alayhi salam. So when they they made their trick, and then Musa, he threw his staff down, the staff turned into a serpent and devoured their trickery, their fake sorcery. These two sorcerers says, فَأُلْقِيَ السَّحَرَةُ سُجَّدًا. So these sorcerers, they bowed, they went into prostration because they realized the truth at that moment, and they stated, قَالُوا آمَنَّا بِرَبِّ هَارُونَ وَمُوسَى, that we believe in the Lord of Harun and Musa. The reaction from the Pharaoh, he was shocked that he brought out his best, and it resulted in them submitting and accepting the call towards truth, the call towards righteousness, the call towards Tawheed. And so the Pharaoh, he said, قَالَ آمَنْتُمْ لَهُ قَبْلَ أَنْ آذَنَ لَكُمْ. He says, do you believe? You believe in their Lord before I even give you permission? In other words, the tyrant and a tyrannical person who's in power does not even want a person to think and reflect for themselves. Yes, they may say, oh, yeah, you're free to do so. But once a person becomes independent of that tyranny, of that tyrant, and is not, again, following their line of thinking, their direction, then this makes them unhappy. آمنتم له قبل أن آذن لكم. Do you believe before I even allow you to believe? And then immediately, or at least one of the actions of that tyrant is to smear those people who have gone outside the parameters of what they think that, oh, everyone should think this way, everyone should be in this way. This is the type of, society that it should be. So they begin to, Pharaoh, the same people that he called forth, he began to accuse them, falsely accuse them, to smear their image of who they are. He says, إِنَّهُ لَكَبِيرُكُمْ الَّذِي عَلَّمَكُمُ السِّحْرَ. He says, oh, yes, it's obvious to me now that, Musa, he was your master. He's the one who taught you your sorcery. And so therefore you came and you staged this so that Musa would win. And then you will prostrate. This is what the Pharaoh said. Again, because the tyrant are those who think that authority stops with them. Again, they will be arrogant. They will not see any power higher than their power. As the Pharaoh himself, he stated, أَنَا رَبُّكُمُ الْأَعْلَى. I'm your greatest authority. I'm your greatest Lord, or the one who's responsible for the tarbiyah of those who are beneath his power. In other words, that tarbiyah, the education or programming of the way people think, the way they act, what they do, their choices. They may think they're free, but it is all part of the programming that the Pharaoh set forth. And this is why he says, you believe before I give you permission? Then he accuses them to smear them, to show others who are still under the story, no, these people, they weren't right from the beginning. They, to taint them. The next action of the Pharaoh and the Pharaoh complex is to emit and to distribute this physical punishment. He says that وَلَأُقَطِّعَنَّ أَيْدِيَكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ مِنْ خِلَافٍ وَأُصَلِّبَنَّكُمْ فِي جذوع النخل. He says, then I will cut your limbs from opposite sides, which is a crucifixion, and he will place them in the palm tree. وَلَتَعْلَمُنَّ. Why would he do this? وَلَتَعْلَمُنَّ أَيُّنَا أَشَدُّ عَذَابًا وَأَبْقَى. So that they will know that who has actual power. Is it the Musa, the Lord he is calling towards, or is it me? I have power. And what the Pharaoh did not recognize, and also what those people who have the Pharaoh complex does not recognize, is that first and foremost, whatever power that they have, Allah yu'ti mulka man yasha. Allah gives power to whoever He wants in this world, and that is limited. Some will recognize that yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed me in authority. And this is why we see that the Musa, when we read the story, is a very interesting aspect of the story that quite often is not pointed out. Musa never told Fir'aun to give up your power. Like, give up your power and I will sit in the seat of power and now you will be my citizen or subject under me. No, Musa always called Pharaoh towards Tawheed, asked him not to oppress others. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he sent Musa to Fir'aun, he asked him, Hal yatazakka, that will he purify himself? Will Fir'aun purify himself? Call him towards purifying himself, to recognize that there's no authority greater than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if he recognizes this, then the Pharaoh will again uplift the people. He will again establish justice in the land. One of the similar calls that even the Prophet and Nabi Yusuf, he did with the pharaohs of his time. He did not pull them out of power. He said, no, understand Tawheed, say La ilaha illallah, believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and establish justice. If you want to rule over a piece of land, then you're ruling over that piece of land, but do so understanding that the only authority is that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just as Imam, another very nice example we find as well, is that Imam Ali alayhi in his letter to Malik Ashtar, he tells Malik Ashtar, he says that when you are governing Egypt, he says, know that there's someone who has authority over you, who has walayat over you. And of course, Imam Ali alayhi he addresses what is immediate on people's mind, which is Imam Ali, because he is the Khalifa at the time. So, and Malik Ashtar is simply an emir. He's a governor, and he has to answer to the leadership of Imam Ali. And then Imam Ali, he also addresses in that letter, he says, someone has wilayat over you, which would be your imam, and know that over your imam, there's someone who has authority over wilayat, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So ultimately, Allah is where all power lies. So that freedom that the Pharaoh or that person with the Pharaoh complex has is to remove, again, that freedom almost of choice, that education. Ana, as Pharaoh said, Ana Rabbukum al-A'la, the one who's responsible for the direction of the society, the direction in which people are ushering the you could say the cultivation, their cultural preferences, the way they want to look or to be like. Again, all of that to some extent is through the programming, at least also at that time, and we still see it today as well, how people are being ushered into a direction. And someone who steps outside of that, they begin to, again, if the society is not, or those who are at the helm of society are not recognizing that, no, all authority lies with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will become uncomfortable with people making different choices. And where we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as He delivered that message to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not have that issue. In fact, he says, and he gives good tidings to the servant. وَبَشِّرِ الْعِبَادِ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ وَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَهُ. So good tidings to that servant, and everyone is a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that good tidings would be for that servant who listens even to different perspectives, but they choose the right perspective. In other words, they choose that perspective and understanding that, yes, there is no authority but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If they followed injustice and they were didn't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it does not do any harm to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he has no need to oppress. Yes, he will reward good and evil will be punished. It's not that the evil is punished because it's done anything to him. No. Those individuals who have been unjust, they have oppressed others, and impressing others, a person will be accountable for that. But it has done nothing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah says that la ikraha fid din. There's no compulsion in religion. There's no compulsion in your way of life. It does not harm Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He guides you to the path, imma shakiran wa imma kufura. That either you're grateful, you're thankful. In other words, you recognize the tawheed, the authority of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to cultivate within society, among human beings, wants to cultivate justice and being upright, being fair, even to the point, and going back to that letter that Imam Ali alayhi salam wrote to Malik Ashtar, even if at one point a person was, you could say, they were misguided or they were hostile, but then now they have come to a point that, oh, well, they're going to be at peace and they're going to be at ease, living by justice and according to justice, then this is something that is fine, even within the Islamic society. And it's a very interesting point that Imam Ali, he writes to Malik Ashtar, he tells Malik Ashtar, he says that, because at times there were wars between the Byzantine Empire and the Muslims in Egypt. And Imam Ali told Malik Ashtar, yes, protect the borders, don't allow people to encroach upon the borders who are fighting with the Muslims or the citizens, who some of them were not even Muslims, living in Egypt at the time. Then he told Malik Ashtar, he says, but if there are some who are outside of Egypt, meaning in the Byzantine Empire, but they want to come and they want to be citizens of Egypt, he says, even if they were hostile and they were fighting, and you even saw them across the battlefield fighting, but now they want to live in peace among the Muslims and the Christians, whoever is living in that society at the time, they want to live in peace. Imam Ali says, don't forbid them. Allow them to come in. He says, although they were hostile. Of course, Imam Ali says, make sure that they are truly coming to live in peace and allow them to live. And don't hold against them that once they were hostile. So don't hold it against them. Ensure that they're coming, they're going to be there, they're going to live in peace. This is the hurriya that Islam affords to people who are inside or governed by those laws of Islam. It's something that, honestly, even when we look at the track record of Bani Umayyah, and look at the track record of the Abbasids and many other folks who said that they're establishing or they have an Islamic government, or I would say Muslim government, yes, they did not follow all of these parameters. And this is why the Ahlul Bayt alayhim during their time, they stood up for what was correct. They stood against the injustice and to the ability that they were able to during their time period to remind people of these pillars of all authority lies with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we must live by a principle of justice. We must be steadfast on the principle, on the path of justice. And we must afford people freedom. That we cannot oppress people in this society. If we look at the du'as of Imam Zayn al-Abideen, alayhi salatu wasalam, in one of his du'as, regarding this idea and concept of freedom and upholding and maintaining a person's freedom. He says, Imam Zayn al-Abideen, he prays to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, وَلَا تُشْمِتْ بِي عَدُوِّي وَلَا تُمَكِّنْهُ مِنْ عُنُقِي وَلَا تُسَلِّتْهُ عَلَيْهِ. He says, oh Allah, says, don't allow my enemy to gloat over me. Again, to be arrogant like the Pharaoh is, to have that Pharaoh complex. Ana rabbukum al-a'la. So Allah, do not allow him to gloat over me, nor to give him power over me, to put my neck or make my neck subjugated to him. Again, lower me before the enemies, or give him true power over me. And he says, Ilahi, in the same dua, Ilahi, in rafa'tani, faman dha alladhi yada'uni. وَإِنْ وَضَعْتَنِي مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يَرْفَعُنِي. That, oh my Lord, that if you have elevated me, if you have exalted me, who is there to put me down? And if you've placed me low, you've made me lowly, who is there to raise me up? And this is powerful. This is a powerful dua, and not simply as a dua for sure, but also an understanding this idea and concept of freedom. That Allah, don't allow any tyrant to gloat over me, to feel that he's higher than me, or that he has power over me. Because if you've lifted me up, who is he to put me down? In other words, this in itself is speaking to the mentality, also the psychology of people who have faith. Just as Imam Zayn al-Abideen did. Did he feel that he was lowly? Okay, he's in chains. He's been ushered to Kufa and to Sham, to Damascus. He's in a dungeon in Damascus. But at any time did it break the spirit of Zaynab al-Kubra or Imam Zayn al-Abideen or those who were in prison? No, it did not break their spirit. And we know this because when you look at the khutbah of Zaynab salamullah alayha in Kufa, her khutbah in Damascus, the khutbah of Imam Zayn al-Abideen alayhi also in Damascus, that he was making a statement, whoever knows me, they know me, and ana ibnu Mecca to Medina. I'm the son of Mecca and Medina. I'm the son of Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm the son of Fatima and Ali alayhi salam. And then Yazid hurried. He called someone, call the adhan to stop him from speaking. Imam Zayn al-Abideen says, yes, well, this is my objective, to make sure that adhan is always there. And that what is said in the adhan, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. So this did not break the spirit of the Ahlul Bayt. So Yazid, though he shackled the Imam, he shackled Zaynab al-Kubra, Kulthum, he shackled them, but they understood that he had no power over them. That the power only stops with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if Allah elevates you, elevates your spirit and your dignity, your true understanding of freedom, then your freedom can never be taken away from you. This is the message that we get from this dua from Imam Zayn al-Abideen. Then he continues, وَقَدْ عَلِمْتُ أَنَّهُ لَيْسَ فِي حُكْمِكَ ظُلْمٌ. And oh Allah, I know that in your laws, that there's no oppression. I mentioned that freedom, again, there's no absolute freedom. Only Allah is free to do whatever he wants and whatever he pleases, whatever he wills. But any concept and idea of freedom in any society is based on the parameters, freedom, parameters of the law. I can't simply, I'm not so free that I can just simply, I'm going to go into my neighbor's garage and get his car and just drive off and drive wherever I want and not have any repercussions. No, there's the law. There's the boundaries of law. I'm not afforded that freedom. And that's true. So freedom is based on the boundaries of the law. And so Imam Ali Zayn al-Abideen alayhi salam, he says that in the boundaries of the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's no dhulm. There's no oppression at all. And oppression is equivalent to the taking of freedoms. وَلَا فِي نِقْمَتِكَ عَجَلَ. And know Allah, that in your displeasure, again, if someone broke that law, in that displeasure, you're not hasty towards punishment of that person. وَإِنَّمَا يَعْجَلُ مَنْ يَخَافُ الْفَوْتِ. So only those who fear losing something, that they are hasty in their punishment, they are hasty. وَإِنَّمَا يَحْتَاجُ إِلَى ظُلْمِ الضَّعِيفِ. And only those who are weak, they need to oppress others. They need to, again, take the freedom and liberation of others. Why? Because they themselves are weak. And they fear that if they don't take the liberation and freedoms of others, يَخَافُ الْفَوْتِ. Maybe they won't have what they have. Or that those who they oppress will come and sit in their place. This is what they fear. And this is why they oppress others. And another dua, just to show you that this oppression is equated with ignorance. As Imam Zayn al-Abideen, he prays, he says, he speaks about the Quran and how the Quran is revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, وَجَعَلْتُهُ نُورًا نَهْتَدِي مِنْ ظُلُمِ الضَّلَالَةِ وَالْجَهَالَةِ. That by the Quran, we are guided away from and out of the darkness, not only the darkness, the oppression of misguidance and of ignorance. Because when a person does not have knowledge, does not have understanding, yes, they will easily fall subject to oppression. And unfortunately, sometimes I've seen this in some ways that's it's not good to speak about, but sometimes, an adult oppresses a child, or a husband oppresses a wife because he keeps her in the dark about stuff. But once they understand that, no, this is my right. I have a right for this. Because by not telling them what their rights are, then they become oppressed. And it's easy to oppress. And Imam Zayn al-Abideen so beautifully states, as we mentioned, that if you're not a part of the solution, then you should not be a part of the problem. Do not be co-opted and saying, oh, well, people are not oppressed, or somebody's being oppressed, has nothing to do with me. I'll turn and I'll look the other way. Imam Zayn al-Abideen, alayhi salatu wasalam, and one of his du'as, and this is a beautiful part, he says, Allahumma inni a'tadiru ilayka min madhluman dhulima bihadrati falam ansuru. So, oh Allah, I seek your forgiveness. I ask you to forgive me, to excuse me, that if someone was oppressed in my presence and I did not help that person. So in order to, again, to uplift or to be, uplift that third pillar of a righteous society, then we cannot turn a blind eye to oppression and injustice. We have to stand up against oppression, stand up for justice, either with our tongue, with our hands, to make a change, to make things better so that people are not oppressed. And if we look at those rights that Imam Zayn al-Abideen, alayhi salatu wasalam, he outlines in Risalat al-Hukuk, we understand also about this final pillar of an Islamic society, a righteous society, that these rights are outlined in order to ensure that justice prevails, to ensure that, again, as he writes out, the first right that he writes in, that he dictated to Abu Hamza Thamali in the Risalat al-Hukuk was the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the right of Allah trumps everything. And of course, a person may say that, well, Imam Zayn al-Abideen also in this Risalat al-Hukuk, he speaks about the master, a person who owns slave, and is not their freedom taken? It's not their freedom taken? And this is a topic that is very interesting to speak about. There's been a lot of questions, but why does Islam allow slavery? Or what is the concept of slavery in Islam? And tonight, as we were speaking about this third pillar of Islamic society, then how does slavery factor into this? One of the things we have to realize and remember is that, again, this aspect of society predated the last revelation, the final revelation. And so it was a way to deal with this idea and concept of slavery. And it's put very beautifully in the Risalat al-Hukuk of Imam Zayn al-Abideen, at least the idea and the concept of it as far as moving towards an Islamic society. When we read in the Risalat al-Hukuk, it's the 21st right or the 20th right, depending on which copy of the Risalat al-Hukuk you have, where it says that there's a right of the mamluk, right of the slave. Right there, it tells you that, well, wait a minute, this is not any form of slavery that most people, they think about, because the chattel slavery that existed throughout most of the world and most brutally here in America is a type of slavery where no one who was a slave was afforded any rights. They weren't citizens. They had no rights, none. But Imam Zayn al-Abideen says, no, the person who is considered is called a slave is owned, or rather their labor is owned by another. It says a person has rights. So this is completely opposite of what others think. And we read this, and it's not time to read, we don't have time to read through the whole thing, but the person has rights. And what does Imam Zayn al-Abideen say about that person who is a slave? He says, first of all, the first right that that person has, and ta'lam, the person who is a master, and ta'lam annahu khalqu rabbik, to know that this person who you own their labor is a creation of Allah. It's a creation of Allah. وَابْنُ أَبِيكَ وَأُمِّكَ وَلَحْمُكَ وَدَمُكَ. Subhanallah. It says, and this person who you're claiming to own, now everyone is a servant, al-abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but this person who, again, you're owning their labor, first of all, they're creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then they're your brother or sister, by your parents, by your mother and your father. And here this mother and father means Adam and Hawa. So they're children of Adam and Eve. So if you are saying that you're a slave master or you own it, then you know that, look, this is your brother. وَلَحْمُكَ وَدَمُكَ. And this person shares the same blood that you do, the same flesh that you do. وَتَمْلِكُهُ, and you have this so-called ownership over them, not because you've created them. No, Allah created them. Allah created them, and you created their limbs. And also, this is very interesting. Then Imam Zayn al-Abideen says, and even you don't even provide for them. You don't even provide their sustenance for them. SubhanAllah. Okay, I have power or authority over this person. He's my servant, my slave. But Imam Zayn al-Abideen says, you haven't provided their sustenance. The sustenance comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you an abundant and sufficient sustenance for you to take care of them. In fact, that he's under your authority as a trust and an amanat from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That for some situation or some reason, this person is in this situation, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed him in your trust and has placed him as an amanat for you to take care of them, to take care of your brother in creation, your brother, also maybe your brother in deen. And this is exactly also what the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he taught and he advocated during his time. Not just Imam Zayn al-Abideen, as one of the companions by the name of Ma'dhur ibn Suwaid, he said he went to Abu Dhar al-Ghafari. He says when he went to Abu Dhar al-Ghafari, he says Abu Dhar al-Ghafari had this cloth. It was what is called a burdu. And a burdu is at that time, I guess it was a nice fancy cloth. It had stripes on it. And so he had a piece of that cloth, and usually they kind of maybe cloaked it over themselves. So he had this burdu, and he had one on himself. And then Ma'dur, he said he saw that the servant of Abu Dhar also had a cloth, a burdu. So they both had pieces of burdu. And so he told Abu Dhar al-Ghafari, he says, you know what, why not just take both of these pieces of nice cloth with these stripes or pinstripes on it and make yourself one nice thobe. And, you can give your servant some other clothing. And Abu Dhar al-Ghafari, and we know that Abu Dhar al-Ghafari, as the Prophet said, he will live by his tongue, he would die by his tongue. And because of his truthfulness, Abu Dhar al-Ghafari says, no, I heard Rasulullah tell us, he says, Ikhwanukum ja'alahumullahu tahta aydikum. He says, these are our brothers. Yes, maybe he's under my care, under my authority, he's my servant, but he's my brother. And because he's my brother, فَمَنْ كَانَ أَخُوهُ تَحْتَ يَدِهِ فَلْيُطْعِمْهُ مِمَّا يَأْكُلُ. And the Prophet says that because he's your brother and he's under your authority, he says that you feed him what you eat and you dress him as you dress. وَلَا يُكَلِّفْهُ مَا يَغْلِبُهُ. And do not give him more than he can bear, more work than he can bear. This is because if you do so, then that person will curse you. And we find this example also in Imam Ali, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salam, a beautiful story where he and Qambara, they went in the market. Imam Ali bought two shirts. One was for 3 dirham, the other was for 2 dirham. So Imam Ali, he took the one for 2 dirham, he gave the one that was more expensive to Qambar, the servant of Imam Ali. And Qambar, he looked at the shirt, he was like, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, because they were together when Imam Ali brought it. He says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, I can't wear this shirt. I don't want to wear this shirt. You wear this shirt. He says, this is the nicer shirt. He says, because you go and you give the khutbah, you go and you lead the Salatul Jummah, you're standing there on the minbar, people see you, it's better for you to have this. He says, I'll take the 2 dirham one. So Imam Ali, he says, no. He says, no. He says, Ya Qambar. He says, you are young, you're youthful, you're a handsome youth, you should wear the nice shirt. And I'll just take the 2 dirham. He says, in fact, you take this one, you take the nice one, and I'll take the 2 dirham. And no more discussion. He says, because you're young man, you're vibrant, you should wear this, you should look good. And we find this in the sirat of many of our Imams, alayhim afsalatu wasalam, where their servants dressed nicer than them. And unfortunately, if we look in the Muslim world today, someone who is a servant or a housemaid, unfortunately, what is their state? Are they wearing what the people of that house wear? Are they eating what they wear? In some cases, they're not. And this is an unfortunate thing, though the sirat of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afsalatu wasalam is this. I'll end here with this one hadith. It's a beautiful hadith. This is from Imam Baqir alayhi salatu wasalam, where he states that arba'un man kunna fihi min al-mu'minin askanahu Allahu fi a'la 'illiyin fi ghurafin fawqa ghurafin fi mahall sharafi kull sharaf. Imam Baqir alayhi salatu wasalam, son of Imam Zayn al-Abideen, you see that we are Imam Baqir, he's also learning from his father about this idea and this concept of freedom, and that a person who is a servant, or even what we consider a slave, is not a person without rights. It's a person that enjoys freedom in a sense within Islam, meaning that they are citizens, they have rights. Yes, their labor may be owned by someone else, but again, they are dignified people. So Imam Baqir, he says that there are 4 people, or 4 things that for traits, if a believer has these traits, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will place him in the highest of places in paradise, in a room or rooms, that is above all other rooms, in a station of nobility, sharaf. That person will embody, you could say, it will be an example, will be exemplary in his nobility. I'm not going to go with all three of those, the three previous characteristics. The last trait is what's important here. And that is the trait that if a person, he says, man, among these believers, man lam yakhruk bimamlukihi wa a'anahu ala ma yukallifuhu wa lam yastasi'uhu fima lam yatuq. Says, is that person, that believer, who may have a slave or a servant, someone who is working under them, someone who they perhaps own a good part of their labor, is this, that believer who does not rip this person down. In other words, don't strip this person from their dignity. This is different from what we understand of slavery from the history of folks in the world. Does not rip that person up, rip their dignity away from them, and they help that individual with regards to what they have, that duty they've given to them. So if they had their servants, oh, you know what, go chop some trees and bring some firewood. So they don't just send them out there, they actually go and they help. So in other words, they're working together. And also the third thing, they don't give that person more than they can bear. And this is why we see that in the Sirat of Ahlul Bayt, often if they had servants, they will buy them, they will train them, teach them some sort of skill, teach them first and foremost Tawheed, about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about the Prophet, about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from society. Of course, these three pillars of faith, of Iman, of istiqamah, of justice, and being steadfast on the path of justice, and also about freedom. And then they will set their servants free. So inshallah, I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He continues to guide us by the Quran, by the wisdom of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhim afsalatu wasalam, and instill within us these pillars of a righteous society so that we can be, first and foremost, live by them ourselves, by Iman, by a sense of justice, and also live by freedom, the principle of freedom, and advocate for these things. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the dua of Gharik to hasten the reappearance of Zaman and make us among his helpers, his companions, and those who sacrifice their lives for him. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, Ya Muqallib al-Qulub, Thabbit Qulubana ala Dinik, وعجل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان واجعلنا من أعوانه وأنصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه وتحت لواء بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.